Hi everyone, so this is a two-part video. In the first part we're going to just talk about setting up proportions, and in the second part we'll talk about solving proportions. So we'll stop the video and make two separate ones, but you're going to be using the same set of notes for stop 4, pit stop A, and then you'll use the same notes for stop 4, pit stop B. Okay, so in this first part, setting up proportions, go ahead and open that up. First thing we need to know is what's a proportion. So we've been talking about ratios and rates, and a proportion is an equation showing that two ratios are equal. All right, so it's when we take our two ratios and we say that they're equal to each other that we've formed a proportion. And we're going to talk a lot about equations this year, so this is kind of our first time to use this word, but anytime we are using an equation, we're going to be looking for that equal sign in an equation. So an equal sign is what makes it an equation. And the proportion part of it means we're going to be using two ratios. So remember, we've looked at ratios as being written in three different ways, using the word two, with a colon, and as a fraction. But as a proportion, you're going to most often see it written as fractions, two fractions. I'll show it to you other ways, but most often, and for our purposes, really, we're going to use the fractions. So here's some examples. You have 10 over 25 equal to 40 over 100. So ratio is just comparing two numbers. I have 10 over 25, that's two numbers, and then I have another set of numbers, 40 over 100. They're equal, so this forms a proportion. So here's what I was talking about. You could use the colon, same set of numbers, 10 colon 25, 40 colon 100. This is the same exact proportion, it's just written with the colon. And then I can also use the word 2 again, 10 to 25 or 40 to 100. But you're going to see we're going to pretty much only use the fraction part because it's just easier to work with. All right, so what we're concentrating on in this video is how to set up a proportion. So you're going to be seeing some word problems, and we're going to be solving these eventually. But right now, the important part is how to set it up. If you can get that part right, the solving part is very, pretty straightforward. All right, so what I want you to think about when you set up a proportion is that you are making two equal fractions. All right, so because ratios can be written as fractions, we're going to think that these are equal to each other. And you want to start with your words first. Set up a word ratio first. This is probably the most important part of setting up your proportion, is making sure you get your words with the right numbers. And so we're going to start by doing a comparison of the words, and then we'll fill in the numbers. And then after you have your word ratios set up, you're going to fill in your 4 boxes. So we're going to make 4 boxes. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. But look, if you look back here, at these numbers right here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers in a proportion. So when we write a proportion, we're going to have 4 spaces we need to fill in. All right, so let's see how that works. A worker can complete the assembly of 15 tape players, sorry, you can't see that, in 6 hours. At this rate, how many tape players can the worker complete in a 40-hour work week? So first, I want to start with the words. And to figure out what words I'm talking about in a proportion type problem, I'm looking for what's being compared. And so usually those are the words getting repeated. So in this first sentence right here, it says a worker can complete the assembly of what? 15 tape players. 15 tape players, okay, in 6 hours. So I'm going to highlight it so maybe it'll stand out to you, in 6 hours. Okay, and I want to know how many tape players can the worker complete in 40 hours? All right, so my word ratio is going to contain the words tape players and hours, because that's what's being compared. I'm going to write tape players over hours. Now, could I put hours over tape players? Yes, as long as you fill in your boxes with the words, with the numbers that go with each of your words. All right, so the second step after I figure out what words are being compared is to draw my 4 boxes. So I'm literally going to draw 4 boxes. And that's going to remind me that I have 4 spots to fill in my proportion. All right, so the first number was 15 tape players. So this is why your word ratio is important. The tape players is in your numerator, so I'm going to write 15 in my numerator, and then in 6 hours. So the 6 hours is in my denominator. And I want to keep these two numbers together because they're a ratio, 15 and 6 hours, so 15 over 6. So I have my first two boxes filled in. And then I need to go back and set up the second ratio. So I said, how many tape players can the worker complete in 40 hours? So hours again is where? Is it the top one or the bottom one? It's the bottom one. So 40 is going to go on bottom with hours. Did they give me another number to fill in here? No, they didn't. All right, they don't tell me how many tape players, and that is what I'm going to be solving for. So what we're going to learn in the next video is how you would do that. But for now, we're just going to mark an X in that empty box. And X is a variable, which means it stands for some unknown number. And that unknown number is what we're going to be looking for in the next video. All right? So let's try another one. Carol spends 17 hours in a 2-week period practicing her culinary skills. How many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? So the first thing I want to set up is my word ratio, which means I need to go back and figure out what words are being compared. Well, 17 hours, okay, is here. In a 2-week period, practicing her culinary skills, and then how many hours, I see that being repeated again here, does she practice in 5 weeks? So I know one of my words is going to be hours. What's my second word? Well, usually the ratio is written pretty close together. So 17 hours to what? In a 2-week period. So 2 weeks. And then how many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? So that's weeks repeated right there. So I'm going to use hours and weeks as my word ratio. And I do want you to write this down. And then you're going to draw your 4 boxes. That's step 2. So after you have your boxes, you need to fill them in. So this starts with 17 hours. So that would go on top because that's where my hours are in a 2-week period. So the 2 is going to stick with the 17, but it's going to go on bottom because it's a week, 2 week. And I'm going to continue reading. How many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? So the 5 goes with what word? Week. And where's week? On bottom. So what I don't know is how many hours are in 5 weeks. So that is where I'm going to put, and you don't have to use an X. I'm just using an X because that's the most common letter to use. But you could use anything, A, pick your favorite letter, to fill in that last one. And that is what, again, we're going to be solving for later. All right, and number 3, a rainstorm produced a rainfall of 2 inches per hour. So how many hours would it take to get a rainfall amount of 1 foot? Right, so in this one, I've got 2 inches. Sorry, you'll hear my dog walking around. 2 inches, and it's per hour. Okay, remember per hour means how many hours? 1 hour. All right, so that number's there even though we don't see it. How many hours, all right, so there's hours again, would it take to get a rainfall amount of 1 foot? 1 foot. All right, so when I start to set up my ratio, I have a problem because I have inches, hours, and feet. So this is wrong. This is a problem because I can only compare 2 words. So 2 inches and an hour, or do I want to use inches and feet? Well, what would make this simpler is if I just change 1 foot to inches. So if you don't know how many inches are in a foot, you could look it up. Your star chart is available to you. But hopefully most of you know that 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. So what I'm going to do is change my 1 foot into 12 inches. Hopefully I can still highlight that. That's yeah. And then that way I'm comparing the same word. All right, so I'm going to use inches and hours, and I'm going to abbreviate. And then I'm going to set up my 4 boxes and fill them in. So I have 2 inches. That goes on top because inches is on top. Per hour, remember that's 1, so I'm going to write a 1 there. How many hours does it take to get a rainfall of 1 foot? So 12 inches would be on top here because it's inches. And then what I don't know this time, my variable is on bottom, X. Oh, my dog again, sorry. All right, number 4. The Millers drove 105 miles on 4 gallons of gas. At this rate, how many miles can they expect to drive on 6 gallons of gas? So I see miles, 105 miles. How many miles can they expect to drive on 6 gallons? And I also am seeing gallons, 4 gallons, and 6 gallons. All right, so I'm going to do miles and gallons as my word ratio. What's the next step? Draw your boxes. All right, so 105 miles, where's the 105 going to go? Up here. 4 gallons, where's the gallons going to go? On bottom here. How many miles on 6 gallons? So the 6 is going to go top or bottom. Hopefully you're saying bottom, it's gallons. Then what I don't know is miles, so it goes here. Now, sometimes people think, well, what if I read it and I put gallons on top and miles on bottom? That would be fine, as long as your numbers stick with the right word. So if I put gallons on top and miles on bottom, then I need to switch it so that the 4 is on top and the 6 is on top, because then the gallons would both be on top. All right, the last one, on her last benchmark test, Norma's ratio of correct to incorrect answers was 3 to 1. That's a ratio written with a colon, but that's how you say it, 3 to 1. If there were 36 questions on the test, how many did she get right? All right, so I've got a ratio of correct to incorrect. If there were 36 questions on the test, how many did she get right? So if we're talking about how many she got right, are we talking about correct or incorrect? We're talking about correct. So even though they switched words, they mean the same thing, correct. Now, I also need to look at incorrect. Is 36 the same thing as the number of questions she got incorrect? Because they're using 2 different words here. Correct and right mean the same thing, but incorrect answers, and there were 36 questions on the test, that's 2 different things. So incorrect is what she got wrong, but 36 questions is how many questions were on the test. That's a total. All right, so they've switched words. This is a little tricky. So I'm going to go with the questions, number this right here, as my other word. So I'm going to do correct. And instead of questions, I'm going to write total questions. Because she didn't get 36 questions wrong, that's how many were on her test. So now I'm going to set up my boxes. All right, and again, this one's a little more complicated, but we can figure it out. So the number of correct answers she got was 3 to 1. So she got 3 correct out of how many? Well, not 1. Incorrect was how many she got wrong. So she got 3 wrong and she got 1 right. How many did she do altogether? If you add 3 plus 1, you get 4. So the total questions she for this ratio is 3 out of 4. All right, so again, what did I do? 3 to so correct to incorrect means she got 3 correct and 1 incorrect. So 3 correct, that one's easy. But you're not going to say she did 1 question and got 3 right. That doesn't make any sense. 3 questions right, 1 question wrong, that's a total. What did I do? I added that together to get the total, 3 plus 1. Okay? All right, and then if there are 36 questions on the test, all right, then that would be what? The number she got right or the total questions? So 36 would be the total, and then I'm trying to figure out how many she got right or correct. So that would be where I put my variable x. Okay, so again, we're setting up proportions. The first step when you're setting up a proportion is to start with your word ratio. So get those words written down first, and then draw your 4 boxes and fill them in. All right, so I'll see you soon.